That morning, the April sun stretched across the pines of North Carolina, the air still cool with a touch of mist. On the wooden porch of the old house, I carried a hot cup of black coffee, breathing in the damp earth after last night's light rain. It should have been a peaceful morning, the kind a 62-year-old man like me had learned to treasure after years in the service and a lifetime of hard work. But instead of peace, a thick envelope sitting square in the wooden mailbox down the road turned everything upside down. On cream-colored paper, the raised letters read Riverbend Preserve Homeowners Association, shining under the sun. My heart skipped. I didn't live in Riverbend Preserve. This land, over 40 acres, had been in my family since my father's time. It sat apart, on a hill surrounded by forest and a clear lake I'd built the dam for with my own hands. Yet here they were, sending me this envelope like a sentence. I tore it open. Inside was a long letter, cold and packed with legal terms: serious violation, hydraulic risk, unauthorized water storage. The last line hit like a hammer: a $3,000 fine and an order to open every floodgate immediately. Signed, Cynthia Walsh, HOA president. Cynthia, better known as the Clipboard Queen, was famous for measuring people's grass, snapping photos of trash cans out of place, and handing out warnings like tickets. But now she wasn't just patrolling her neighborhood. She was coming after my lake, the one my father and I built back in the 90s, fully legal and strong enough to guard this land through decades of storms. I stared at the bold words "Final Warning" at the bottom of the page. A chill ran down my spine. They really thought they could force me to bow. I set the letter on the wooden table, sat silent for a few seconds, listening to the wind whisper through the pines. And right then, I knew. If I did exactly what they demanded, this story wouldn't end the way they imagined. My name's Michael Turner. I'm 62. I served 20 years in the Army before becoming a welder at a fabrication shop in Charlotte. When I hit the right age, I walked away from that heavy work and came back to the countryside of North Carolina, to the 40-plus acres my dad bought in the late 80s. The land sits on a hillside, far from town. Down in the valley is Riverbend Preserve, a neighborhood that popped up in just the last 10 years. From my wooden porch, I can look down at their shiny new houses, perfectly trimmed lawns, and long white fences that look like they were drawn with a ruler. It's a different world from mine: towering pines, red dirt roads, and the creek that runs into the lake I built with my own 2 hands. That lake wasn't some whim. Back when I was younger, my dad and I spent months pouring concrete for the dam, digging channels, and setting up the floodgates. Everything was engineered, permitted, and stamped legal in 1992. I've kept every sheet of paper, every blueprint, with pride. Because that lake isn't just a structure. It's family legacy. Through heavy rains and Atlantic storms, it's held steady, protecting the land below. I can still picture the wheat fields, the corn, and now the homes of Riverbend safe after each storm, all because the water stayed up here. My life's been simple. Mornings, I make coffee and sit on the porch, watching the sunlight spread across the water. Afternoons, I walk the dam, check the gates, pick up fallen branches. Sometimes friendly folks from town bring me an apple pie, and I trade them a few fish I've caught. I don't care much for petty disputes. To me, the peace of nature is what matters. But Riverbend Preserve is different. It's a new place, filled with high-income families who want their grass flawless, their fences straight, and their trash cans rolled out on the dot. Since the beginning, that HOA has been so strict people outside just shake their heads. They joke that in Riverbend, even a garden gnome out of place could earn you a violation notice. And at the top of it all is Cynthia Walsh, the woman with a clipboard always in hand, walking around inspecting every blade of grass. For years, I figured that was their business, not mine. I lived on the hill, outside their HOA. Nobody had any right to meddle. At least, that's what I thought. But the day I held that letter stamped with red ink, I realized something. The boundary I believed in was no longer safe. Before that letter showed up, my life was so simple it might have looked plain to some folks. But to me, it meant everything. Each day started with the steady clicks of my old coffee maker, the rich smell filling the wooden kitchen. I'd carry a hot cup out to the porch, sit on the creaky wooden chair, and watch the sun climb over the distant mountains. The morning light shimmered on the still lake like a mirror, sometimes rippled by a passing duck. That lake was my pride. After every big storm, I'd check the floodgates, tighten a few bolts, clear out the dry leaves stuck in the channels. It was almost a ritual, reminding me of those days standing beside my dad, the two of us with shovels and picks, building the banks foot by foot. More than once, he told me, "Son, this lake doesn't just hold water. It keeps the land below safe." Whenever I think of that, I feel like he's still here somehow, watching over me. By evening, I usually walked around the lake, listening to the frogs start their song, then stopped at the big rock by the trail to watch the sunset. Time seemed to slow in those moments. Sometimes familiar neighbors from town would visit, bringing bread or smoked meat, and I'd hand them some fresh fish in return. Our talks were always about the weather, hunting season, or little bits of local news. Nobody mentioned rules or paperwork, much less disputes. I'd heard stories about Riverbend Preserve and their strange, strict rules. But to me, that was valley business, nothing to do with an old man living on a hill, tending his lake and his land. I believed that as long as I kept everything legal and orderly, no one could touch it. The calm of the lake, the chilly mornings with fog drifting low, the chorus of crickets at night, it all felt like proof that I'd chosen the right path. A quiet life, close to nature, untouched by the noise of the outside world. That belief is what made it such a shock when the name Riverbend Preserve HOA suddenly showed up in my mailbox. I never imagined the people living at the bottom of the hill could reach all the way up here into the most sacred piece of my life and memory. It all started with that first fine letter, but it quickly turned into a storm of papers and rumors. I read the cold print inside the envelope. Mr. Turner's water storage system is currently in violation of safety standards. The operating permit expired in 2015. You must drain all water within 10 days or face legal action. At the bottom was Cynthia Walsh's looping signature, with a red seal stamped hard like a warning. I sat frozen, the letter trembling in my hands. Expired? I wondered. From what I knew, dam permits only needed one approval. My dad and I were legally permitted in 1992, with the county stamp to prove it. There was no such thing as an expired permit. The code they sent me was some odd number, WRP 201048B. I dug through my filing cabinet, pulled out the yellowed stacks, and sure enough, the number didn't match anything. It wasn't in any format the county had ever used. While I was still trying to make sense of it, my phone rang. My nephew Ryan had sent a link to the Riverbend Preserve Residents Facebook group. I clicked it and my chest tightened. There was a drone video of my lake, with tense music under it. A caption ran across the screen. "Man on the hill stockpiling water, threatening our kids' safety." In the comments, dozens of residents shared their fear. Someone called me a time bomb. Others shouted that we had to make that old man tear down that damn dam. I sat there, the screen lighting my old face. Anger rose slowly, but under it was a sharp pain. A whole community, people who'd never met me, now treated me like the enemy. I thought of the mornings I drank coffee in peace, and how a few lines on paper and some drone shots had turned me into a potential threat. By then, I knew this wasn't a simple mistake. This was a campaign. Cynthia Walsh wanted to expand HOA power. She wanted to make an example of me to show how serious she was. She'd cooked up a plot with a fake permit number and edited video to call me a violator. That night, I sat alone in the wooden kitchen, the letter laid out neat on the table. Outside, frogs still sang by the lake like always. Inside, I wasn't peaceful. I understood that if I didn't push back, they'd keep pushing me into a corner. And from that moment, the real storm began. The very next morning, I called Dale Carter, the county water inspector I'd known for decades. His gravelly voice came through the line. "Mike, I looked at the records. That lake's been legal since 1992. There's no such thing as an expired permit. Those folks down in the valley are just talking nonsense." Hearing that, I let out a breath, but the sting was still there. If I didn't prove it publicly, the HOA would keep twisting the story. I decided to gather evidence, and this time, I'd do it right. That evening, my nephew Ryan pulled up in his pickup. The moment he stepped onto the porch, he held up a brand new drone. "Uncle Mike, it's not fair letting them use drone shots to smear you. Let's film the truth." We walked the fence line, resetting boundary markers. Ryan sent the drone soaring, capturing the full view. The lake sitting squarely inside my property, more than 15 feet from the Riverbend border. On the controller screen, it was crystal clear the red lines marked my land, the floodgate well within it. HOA had no business sticking their nose in. Ryan didn't stop there. He strapped a small GoPro to an old oak near the dam. The angle covered the entire floodgate, recording day and night. "This'll be our silent witness," Ryan grinned, "in case they try something." By the weekend, I'd called Evan, the neighbor's boy studying civil engineering. He showed up with a laptop, modeling software, and a stack of reports. Sitting in my living room, he laid it all out. The reservoir wasn't just harmless, it actually reduced flood risk for the homes below. "If they force you to tear out the floodgate," Evan explained, "the water will rush down uncontrolled. It'll cause erosion and real flooding. They'd be bringing disaster on themselves." Listening to him, I felt both relieved and more determined. Now I had more than my dad's old papers. I had science backing me up. What surprised me was how a few old neighbors from town quietly came by once they heard. Margaret, who runs the grocery, brought me a box of pastries and whispered, "Don't let them bully you, Mike. Everyone who's lived here long enough knows that lake keeps us safe." Her words reminded me I wasn't completely alone. In the dark of all those accusations and cruel words online, there was still a small light truth and real support. I spent the whole night organizing the evidence: original blueprints, inspection reports, drone footage, GoPro clips, Evan's technical analysis. On the table, the papers and hard drives lined up neatly, like an armory I'd used to face the HOA. Looking at that pile, I realized something. In a fight against people hiding behind rules, the only things that mattered were documents and the truth. And this time, I was ready. A week after I'd gathered all the evidence, a white courier truck stopped at the gate. A young guy in a green polo handed me a thick envelope and asked me to sign. The gold embossed notary seal in the corner told me right away, this was the HOA's final move. I sat in the living room, slowly opened it. Inside was a final notice of violation. The language was colder than the earlier letters. Immediate compliance required. Remove all floodgates. Any future damages will be the sole responsibility of Mr. Michael Turner. Right under that was Cynthia Walsh's oversized signature, the raised seal like a glaring red scar. I read it again and again, my chest heavy as stone. They weren't just threatening fines anymore. They were dumping all future disaster risk on me. Any storm, any damage down in the valley, everything would be blamed on me. That night, I couldn't sleep. The familiar frog calls from the lake sounded heavy. I sat in the kitchen, the letter laid out neat in front of me, the warm light throwing cold words into sharp relief. I asked myself, should I give up? Is tearing down what my dad and I built with sweat the only way to get peace? My phone buzzed with a message. It wasn't comfort. A member of the HOA Facebook group posted publicly, "If he won't cooperate, we'll sue him until he's broke. A stubborn old man can't hold the community hostage." The words cut like knives. I felt a whole community turn its back on me. People who'd never set foot on this land were joining in the judgment, wanting me to kneel. In that moment, a strong wind swept the valley and the window panes rattled. I gripped the letter until my knuckles went white. My chest tightened, not just with fear, but because I saw how everything my father left me, his work, his pride, our memories, was on the brink of being wiped out by a few forged lines. I leaned on the table and took a long breath. My head spun. My body felt like a statue. For a second, I thought about packing up and leaving, finding peace in some faraway town. Then I looked up at the old photo on the wall, my dad in his work clothes, standing by the lake we finished years ago. His face was stern and proud. "No," I whispered, my voice tight. "I can't give up. I can't let them take this." In that quiet night, I knew I'd hit bottom. And from the bottom of that despair, a small spark started to glow, a reminder that this fight wasn't over. The next morning, just as sunlight filtered through the pines, I grabbed my phone and called Dale Carter, the county water inspector. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Mike," I read their letter. "Let me make this clear. If you follow the notarized document exactly, legal responsibility shifts entirely to them. What you need to do is record everything: dates, times, actions, evidence. If anything happens, they'll have to take the hit." I sat quiet for a few seconds. His words felt like a lifeline pulling me back from the edge. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel completely alone. That afternoon, I got to work. I wrote a short notice, At the official request of Riverbend Preserve HOA, on date, at time, the floodgate will be opened to allow water to flow freely. This action is taken under protest and to comply with the request. I printed 10 copies, put one in a clear plastic bag, and pinned it right by the floodgate. I sent certified copies to the county office, one to an old friend who's a lawyer and another to the HOA office. I wanted them to know I was following their exact words. Late that day, Ryan drove up in his pickup. He still smelled of smoke from his shift at the firehouse. He stepped onto the porch, read the notice, and whistled low. "You gonna do it for real?" I nodded, calm. This isn't a choice anymore. It's the only way to show them the truth. We headed to the dam together. Ryan set the GoPro back up, making sure the whole thing would be recorded. I grabbed the big wrench, put it on the gear I've turned for years. The metal squealed a little, and then, slowly, the gate started to lift. Clear water pushed out. Not the torrent they'd painted, just a steady, gentle flow down the natural channel into the valley. I stood and watched the water, listening to it trickle through the trees. No explosions, no flash floods, just a little stream finding its way back. I breathed in deep and felt my chest lighten for the first time in weeks. That night I sat on the porch with my coffee again. The radio said a heavy storm was coming from the west, expected to drop over 6 inches this week. I looked at the small stream at the hill's base, then at the notice I'd pinned by the dam. A strange calm came over me. I knew I'd done the right thing. Now all I could do was wait. Wait for the rain. Wait for the truth to show itself. And wait for the day the people who forced me to open the gate would have to face the consequences they brought on themselves. For the whole week after I opened the gate, the water ran steady. Just a silver thread slipping through the trees, then disappearing into the manicured grass below the valley. I watched through the GoPro Ryan had set up. Everything was calm. My lake dropped only a few inches, still safe. If they'd just let nature do its job, nothing would have happened. But the HOA made sure to break it themselves. On Tuesday, a landscaping crew showed up on Riverbend's common land. I stood at a distance, binoculars in hand, watching them drive industrial mowers straight into the native grass along the drainage ditch. That strip of wild growth had been there for decades, holding soil, soaking rainwater, keeping erosion down. By noon it was all gone, leveled into bare dirt. The machines roared, dust flew, and Cynthia Walsh stood with her hands on her hips, nodding like she'd cleaned up an eyesore. I sighed. They'd just cut away their last shield. 2 days later, the GoPro caught water from my hill spilling down onto that bare patch. With no grass to hold it, the flow turned muddy, dragging soil straight into the storm drains. But those drains hadn't been cleaned in ages. From the ridge, I could see it clear, the mouths clogged with dry leaves, plastic bags, even household trash. The water backed up, spreading into a growing swamp right in the middle of the common lawn, exactly where they planned to host their spring festival. As if that wasn't enough, Thursday afternoon someone in the cul-de-sac hired a crew to dig a pool. The backhoe hit a water line, and thousands of gallons gushed down the street, flooding the already overworked drains. Folks scrambled, calling the water company, but the damage was already done. Then the rain came. Just like the forecast said, dark clouds rolled in from the west, dumping storm after storm. I sat on my porch, hot coffee in hand, watching the GoPro feed on my phone. At first, the water rose slowly. But by early Saturday, the festival day, the skies opened wide. Ryan drove up with his drone. We set up the screen right on the porch table. The drone soared, filming scenes out of a disaster movie. The common lawn turned into a wide brown lake, swallowing the food tents they'd just pitched. Wooden stakes marking the booths stuck out like little grave markers. Water pushed past the borders, flooding into the backyards of 3 houses at the base of the hill, leaving streaks of mud on their bright white vinyl fences. In the middle of the chaos, my phone rang loud. I picked up, and Cynthia Walsh's voice screamed down the line. "You did this, Mike. You destroyed the festival. You flooded our homes. I'll call the cops. I'll sue you until you're ruined." I took a sip of coffee, kept my tone steady. "Cynthia, I only did exactly what you ordered. You have the notarized document, your signature on it. I've kept every record. You wanted the water flowing free, and now, the water's doing exactly that." Silence for a few seconds. Just her heavy breathing. Then she hung up, leaving nothing but dead air. Outside, the rain kept hammering. On the screen, Ryan's drone panned across, showing water swirling around the choked drains, no way out. It spread wider, carrying dirt, trash, and with it the pride of a neighborhood once advertised as a riverside luxury paradise. I sat there, listening to the rain on the tin roof, feeling an odd calm settle in. This flood wasn't mine. It was the price of arrogance and carelessness they'd sown themselves. And now, nature was simply finishing the job. That afternoon, just as the rain let up, I heard the buzz in the sky. Not Ryan's drone, but a big orange one with the county logo. It circled low, filming the brown water flooding the common lawn and creeping into the backyards at the base of the hill. I gave a faint smile. That meant Dale Carter had gotten my report and sent a team out. By evening, a neighbor I trusted called me, still shaken. "Mike, you won't believe this. The county engineers are here. They're not looking at your hill. They're focused on Riverbend. They say the storm drains have been neglected for years, and one of the retaining walls cracked back in 2017 never fixed." I sat there in silence. So it was clear. This wasn't about the old man on the hill like they'd been shouting. This was on the HOA. Later that day, the local news came on. A young reporter stood in front of the flooded lawn, muddy houses behind her. Her voice was steady. Residents of Riverbend Preserve are facing unprecedented flooding. Many claim the HOA ignored warnings for years. Then an older resident stepped forward, voice sharp. "We've complained about the clogged drains forever, but all they cared about was nitpicking. Too busy checking on garden gnomes." I almost laughed. That blunt truth was the public verdict against Cynthia Walsh. 2 days later, Riverbend held an emergency meeting at the clubhouse. I wasn't invited, of course, but Ryan had a buddy record the whole thing. Cynthia stepped up to the podium, clipboard in hand, voice hard as steel. "Mr. Turner deliberately sabotaged us. He opened the floodgate to destroy our community." But before she could finish, Frank Miller, one of the board members, plugged in a USB. On the big screen rolled Ryan's video. Landscapers tearing out the native grass buffer, storm drains packed with trash, the spring festival drowning in mud, each clip stamped with date and time. Then came the notarized letter with Cynthia's own signature. "Remove all artificial barriers." The room went dead silent. When the screen went dark, whispers rose, then turned into a wave of questions. Why were the drains never cleared? Who ordered the buffer destroyed? You think we can't recognize your signature? Cynthia's face drained of color. Her hands shook on the clipboard, her mouth fumbling for words. The board voted right there. 3 members suspended her as president. Only 1 defended her. When the result was announced, Cynthia slammed the clipboard on the table and stormed out under the cold stares of dozens of neighbors. The next morning, every house got a thick envelope. Inside was the county's official notice. $90,000 in fines against the Riverbend HOA for 3 violations: destroying a protected natural buffer, failing to maintain storm drains, and ignoring the 2017 repair order for the retaining wall. Not a single line mentioned my name. The entire weight fell on the HOA. And it didn't stop there. That night's news dug deeper. The permit HOA had waved around to accuse me was forged, signed in the name of an engineer who'd retired over a decade ago. The engineer himself went on camera, holding the paper. "This isn't my signature. This is fake." The story spread like wildfire. County police opened a criminal investigation into Cynthia Walsh for falsifying public documents. All of Riverbend buzzed Facebook, the post office, everywhere about one thing. The HOA had destroyed itself. I sat on my porch, crickets chirping after the storm, and felt an odd calm settle in. The secrets were out. The truth had finally spoken. After that storm of headlines, Riverbend Preserve stopped looking like the perfect paradise on their flyers. The common lawn was bare mud. The retaining wall cracked and had to be rebuilt, and residents got notices about a special assessment to cover the massive fine. Lots of families shook their heads, realizing they'd been paying all those fees for nothing but sloppy upkeep and one person's small-minded power. As for me, I did the one thing that put my mind at ease. I closed the floodgate so the lake could slowly return to a steady level. But I didn't stop there. I hired Evan, the engineering student, to help design a new overflow system, wider channels, lined with river rock to prevent erosion, built to handle a once-in-a-century flood. For 2 weeks, I ran the little excavator myself. Evan and I measured, dug, and placed each stone. When we finished, we called Dale Carter to inspect. He held the plans, signed a new certification, and said, "Mike, this isn't just legal. It's a model. A lot of places could learn from this." I smiled, not for the praise, but because I'd done right by my family's land. Meanwhile, the Riverbend HOA had to pay huge settlements to 3 flooded households. The insurance company refused coverage, citing serious lack of maintenance. Every HOA family was hit with extra fees, thousands of dollars each, instead of the new tennis courts they'd been promised. The story of the clipboard queen spread across the county as a warning about the arrogance of those in power. Cynthia Walsh quietly sold her house and left. No clipboard, no fanfare. One summer afternoon, I was checking the overflow when a silver SUV pulled up at the gate. Frank Miller stepped out, the board member who'd bravely plugged in the USB at the meeting. He came up slow, a little unsure, then stuck out his hand. "Mike, I know this caused a lot of trouble, but thanks to that little flood, the county engineer found the retaining wall that was about to fail. If it had collapsed, a whole house could have been wiped out. You didn't wreck our community. You saved us from something worse." I took his hand and felt the sincerity in his eyes. That was the only thanks I needed. In the months that followed, Riverbend changed. They hired real engineering firms to redesign the drainage. The common lawn became a rain garden planted with native wildflowers, and birds came back and sang. Residents stopped obsessing over petty rules and learned to protect the nature around them. Most importantly, they added a rule: the HOA can't intervene on land outside its boundaries without agreement from a lawyer, an engineer, and the whole community. I kept living my simple life on the hill. Morning coffee, afternoon walks by the lake, frogs calling in the evening. Sometimes folks from Riverbend walk their dogs through the woods at the foot of my hill. They look up, give a small nod, and smile. In their eyes, I see respect, the kind no threatening letter could ever buy. That evening on the porch, watching the sun turn the lake red, I took a sip of coffee and smiled. All I did was follow exactly what they wrote. And sometimes, that's enough. When someone in power hands down a foolish order, you don't need to fight fire with fire. You just follow it and let them fall into their own trap.